I still remember the first 3 seconds, the ones you know the rest of the story will hang on, because that's when a woman in a silk coat decided my mother was a prop, and the airplane finally stopped being polite. She walked down the aisle like she owned the cabin, like the leather and the mood were her birthright, and she said, loud enough that half of row 1 heard, "Some people should not be allowed to fly first class." That's how it started. That's the hook, plain and ugly, right where everyone could see it. My name's Mark Hollis. I live in a town called Redford Hollow, and I'm not the sort of guy who likes drama, or, at least, I didn't think I was. My mom, Ruth, is 76, stubborn like an old oak, the kind of woman who still irons handkerchiefs and knows her herbs. We were headed to a follow-up at a specialist, nothing glamorous. Just a flight we'd taken 100 times, and Ruth had a little bracelet she never took off, something from her father, a silly little gold loop, and somehow that bracelet turned into someone else's reason to be cruel. The woman, her name was Vivian Cross, was sharp in a way money sharpens people. New haircut, nails that said, "Don't touch me," perfume like a warning. She had that look of someone who thinks the world has been arranged specifically for her comfort. 2 years earlier, my parents had a run-in with Vivian over a fence line near the hollow. She'd filed a complaint about encroachment on a patch of land that, on paper, she owned, but everyone in town knew the stone wall had been there since before she bought the place. It never really mattered that the wall was historic in Redford Hollow. The rulebook is the rulebook if the rich read it loud enough. There'd been letters, cold calls, a hearing that felt like a show trial, and in the end, my parents lost a little strip of yard and gained a lot of paperwork. Vivian never forgot. I don't think she forgave the idea of living next to people who kept their mouths shut and their hands dirty. So there we were, Ruth in her scarf, Gabe, my dad, joking about the airline peanuts like he always does, me trying to keep my focus on something small and normal so I wouldn't have to think about the hearing or the little humiliations my parents handled without making a scene. And then Vivian found us at the gate like she always did, and she walked into first class like she was walking into the room she'd already paid to own. At first it was sour little comments. "Is that a medical bracelet?" she mouthed to the attendant, not quiet, but the kind of voice meant to be heard by everyone and remembered. The attendant, Maria, was calm, professional, the sort of person who'd seen 1,000 versions of entitlement, and she offered Ruth a window seat because that's what the airline does for elderly passengers with mobility needs. Ruth slept with one eye open. She's cautious that way. The seat assignment must have been a matchbox of fate because Vivian had her eye on that window. She wanted the spectacle of someone else being told to move. She wanted the narrative. The first act set, characters, the little twitch that tells you trouble is coming played out like a bad sitcom for about 20 minutes. Vivian's voice climbed the octave of ownership, a spat of classless jabs about taking advantage of priority seating. She didn't know Ruth's name. She didn't need to. The person was simply a symbol. I tried to laugh it off. Gabe squeezed my shoulder like a signal to back down. Maria offered the kind of professional smile that holds a world of patience. Ruth, bless her, said nothing for a long time, which only made Vivian braver. People in the cabin glanced up, rolled their eyes, or smiled at Ruth like you smile at something fragile and living. Then Vivian did the one thing I think she'd been saving for the right moment. She took out her phone and started recording. "Oh good, look, I'll get this," she said. "You can't have a private seat because you're old." That line hangs in my head because it's both ridiculous and precise, like someone aiming a tiny, sharp knife at someone's dignity. The recording was her weapon. The phone was her court. If the first act is the hook and the setup, the second is where the fight gets real. I don't know why, maybe annoyance, maybe a sudden tidal wave of seeing my mother treated like trash, but I stood up. I said what should have been calm, but wasn't. She's my mom. She can sit wherever she needs. Vivian looked at me like I was an inconvenience to her shopping list. "You think you can tell me what my seat is?" she sneered. The cabin was suddenly a room with everyone pressing their faces to the glass, microphones off, but attention on. Maria, the flight attendant, moved in like a diplomat with kind eyes. "Sir, ma'am, let's keep things polite," she said, and I wanted to hug that woman's patience. But Vivian doubled down, loud and absurd. "I paid for this seat. Don't you dare make a fuss." It was entitlement turned into sound. And then she reached into petty territory. She said, maybe she shouldn't be here at all, loud enough for the person in front of Ruth to flinch. Somewhere in the cabin, an off-duty pilot, a man with tired eyes and a two-plane cap, quietly stood up and said, "Ma'am, recording passengers and making threats is against policy. Either you stop or we'll have to log we had an incident." The tone changed. It was like someone switched the lights on. Vivian puffed like a stopped animal and snarled, "You can't make me." The pilot had already told the purser. People were watching. Phones were out. We built pressure against Vivian with quiet things, witnesses, documentation, the kind of ordinary moral muscle that says, you can be loud, but not anonymous. She realized, I think, that the plane was not a stage where she could invent meaning without consequence. The purser came back, voice even. "We've had complaints about your behavior. Please stop recording and calm down." She didn't arrest her, not on the spot, but she put the behavior on record. That was the turning point. Vivian's confidence shifted to panic. She'd expected applause, not a mirror. And she cracked, the way brittle things do. Her anger curdled into something smaller, humiliation. She tried to regain ground by trashing back at Ruth, by bringing up the fence hearing, by inventing slights and accusing my family of playing the victim. The cabin leaned in. People who'd been polite suddenly felt like jurors. And that's when the true counterattack happened, not mine, but everyone else's. Passengers began to murmur, then to speak up. A woman behind us said, "That's enough." A man with a newspaper folded under his arm said, "You don't talk to old people like that." The pilot made a note. Vivian's own weapon, the phone, became the record of her collapse. The climax came not with fists but with ritual. The captain, in a voice that felt like a gavel, announced we'd have an incident on arrival and security would meet the aircraft. Vivian's face went white with the thing she'd never expected, accountability. She tried to bluff her way past it, tried to turn the story into drama about being picked on. But the evidence is patient. The testimony of 100 eyes is slow and steady and hard to dispute. When we landed, 2 officers waited at the gate like an ending already written. They led Vivian off with a kind of professional bleakness. It wasn't violent, it was formal. She was escorted away, and the aisle felt suddenly very small for her shoes. Afterwards, there was a hush, the kind you get when a crowd watches the curtain fall and then realizes it was maybe watching something personal. Ruth laughed softly, a sound like steam, and said, "Well, Mark, that was a thing." Gabe hugged her, and I remember feeling odd relief and shame at the same time. Relief that a bully was stopped, shame that it took an airplane to force people to stand up. Maria came by and put her hand on Ruth's shoulder, and for a second 2 strangers were just 2 people who'd done their part. The other passengers clapped quietly, like a church choir muttering thanks. I want to be honest about the end because endings are where truth hides. Vivian didn't go to jail. She got a report, a notation, maybe a fine small things that pyramid into consequence. But what stayed with me was the image of her walking past the curtain into the airport and then into the cold, which is the small cinematic moment you see in movies when the villain realizes the world doesn't have to applaud them. For Ruth, the story became a small vindication, but not a victory parade. She wanted no one to make a fuss. She wanted her dignity simple as a cup of coffee on the porch. And for me, it dug into a deeper place. How often do we let petty cruelties stack up because it's inconvenient to stop them? How many little Vivians do we accept as fixtures of the landscape? Here's the part that keeps me awake some nights. Vivian's harassment wasn't random. It was rooted in a kind of land-obsessed entitlement, a person who reads property lines like scripture and believes moral authority follows. The fence dispute wasn't just about stones. It was about who gets to write history in a place like Redford Hollow. She'd wanted to assert dominance, to remind my parents and myself of our place. When that failed, she lashed out in the most public way she could. Understanding that motive doesn't excuse her. It just makes clear how small resentments can become a spectacle if left to fester. I tell this story because it's not only about an entitled woman on a plane. It's about community and the small courage that shows up when strangers stand with you. It's about the quiet bravery of flight attendants who spend their days defusing human tempers, about the off-duty pilot who chose to do the right small thing, about passengers who said enough instead of turning away. Justice in the movies is loud and tidy. Justice in real life is often a single person making a report, a steward noting behavior in a log, a crowd refusing complicity. So here I am, pushing my mother's cart through the terminal, feeling something like a soft, imperfect victory. Ruth is knitting her fingers together, the bracelet glinting in the airport light, and she says, simple as a lesson, don't let them make you small, Mark. It's the kind of thing you can only learn by being there when someone tries. Now I want to hear from you. What would you have done in my shoes? Do you think public shaming is the right response to entitlement, or do we lose something when we turn every confrontation into a spectacle? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Tell me about a time your neighbor or someone in your town pushed too far. And if you like stories like this, hit subscribe and tell a friend, because the most ordinary moments are often the ones that teach us who we are.